November 14th, 1967, the Speakeasy Club, Margaret Street, London, 11:30 at night. Ellen Cross walked to the microphone and asked 60 strangers if any of them could play guitar. She didn't preface it. She didn't explain herself or apologize or give the room the whole story of David Marsh sitting on the floor of the backstage bathroom, or the lunch they had all shared from the same place on Wardour Street, or the 2 hours she had spent that afternoon telling herself tonight was going to be different. She just asked, straight, "Is there anyone here tonight who plays guitar? Our guitarist can't go on." Martin Elroy, senior A&R at Decca Records, was sitting at a table near the back with a glass of scotch and the particular expression of a man who has already decided where the evening is heading. He had a car waiting at midnight. He had given the Ember Roads this slot because someone had called in a favor, and he was already thinking about how to phrase the phone call he would make tomorrow. The one that started with, "We gave them a shot." Nobody moved. A man near the bar looked at his drink. Two women at the front table looked at each other and said nothing. The bartender polished the same glass twice in a row without realizing he was doing it. Then a chair scraped against the wooden floor in the far corner of the room. A man stood up slowly. Dark jacket. Long hair that curled slightly at the collar. Quiet face. He looked like a roadie or a sound technician or simply a man who had wandered in from the cold to wait out the rain. He raised one hand, not high, barely shoulder height, and said 4 words. "I can play a bit." Nobody knew his name yet. In 15 minutes, that would not be true. Ellen Cross had given herself 1 more year when she was 21. That year had become 2. She was 23 now, and tonight was supposed to close the argument. The one her father had started at the dinner table 4 years ago, with a sentence that had never quite left the room. "Music is a fantasy, Ellen. Find something real." Robert Vale was 27. He worked nights at a storage depot in Hackney and drove directly to rehearsals in a van that burned through oil. His girlfriend had stopped asking questions about the future several months ago. He had run out of answers before she ran out of questions. Paul Hines was 21, the youngest, and 3 weeks earlier he had turned down a steady job at his uncle's print shop because of this exact night. He had told himself it would be worth it. He was still telling himself that as he sat behind his drum kit in the speakeasy, with his sticks resting across his knees, listening to Ellen ask 60 strangers for help. David Marsh was the guitarist. David was currently on the floor of the backstage bathroom with his back against the cold tiles, paying the full price for a chicken sandwich from a place on Wardour Street. He had tried twice to stand up and collect himself. The second attempt had been worse than the first. Martin Elroy had driven over from Mayfair, specifically for the Ember Roads. He had spent enough years in this industry to know within the first song whether something was worth his time. He had given tonight that chance. He was now looking at his watch. The club manager had pulled Ellen aside backstage and delivered the news the way you deliver news to someone who is about to be disappointed. There was no rescheduling. The industry people, meaning Elroy, had come tonight specifically. Cancel now, and this window did not reopen. Not next month. Not after a few more rehearsals. Finished. Ellen looked at the empty guitar stand. She looked at Robert standing very still with his bass hanging at his side. She looked at Paul behind the kit, pretending not to fully understand the situation he was in. Then she walked onto the stage. The man in the dark jacket crossed the room without hurrying. That was the first thing Robert noticed. Everyone else had frozen the moment Ellen asked her question, the way a room freezes when something unexpected shifts the air. This man moved through the stillness like he hadn't felt it. He stepped up onto the low stage and picked up David's Epiphone Casino. Not carefully, not with the self-conscious handling of someone touching another person's instrument. He picked it up the way you pick up something that already belongs to your hands. He played 3 quiet notes to check the pitch. Then he adjusted 2 strings. Small adjustments. Precise. The guitar sounded different afterward. Warmer. Like something that had been holding its breath and finally let it go. He looked at Paul across the drum kit. Paul looked back. Ellen gave him the key, told him the name of the first song. He nodded once, like a man who has heard the question before. Paul raised his sticks and counted them in. The first chord landed. Something in the room shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way things change in stories. It changed the way a temperature changes when a window opens in a warm room. Quietly. All at once. in a way that made everyone present reach for a reason they couldn't name. The two men who had been moving toward the door stopped walking. They didn't turn around yet. They just stopped. Ellen came in on the vocal and felt it immediately. She had rehearsed this song 160 times. She knew exactly where it tended to go thin, exactly where the guitar needed to carry the low end of the melody or the whole structure sagged. But tonight nothing sagged. Something was underneath her voice, holding everything up, the way a foundation holds a building, invisibly and completely and without asking for recognition. She sang better than she had sung it in any rehearsal. She didn't understand why until the chorus ended, and she looked sideways and watched his left hand. He wasn't playing at the song. He was listening while he played. Every note was a response to what her voice had just done, like a conversation where the other person is actually paying attention. Martin Elroy set his glass down on the table. The second song was fast. David had written it to stretch himself. Quick chord changes, a solo section in the bridge that needed real precision and real feeling in equal measure, and very little room to hide if either of those things was missing. It was the hardest thing in their set. The stranger played it without hesitation, but he didn't play it the way David played it. He played it the way it was supposed to sound, each phrase following the one before it cleanly, building toward a resolution so inevitable that when it arrived, two people in the front row exhaled at the same moment without realizing they were doing it. Robert was watching the left hand the whole time, the fingering patterns, the way the man shifted positions without looking down at the neck. And then on the high E string, a particular motion, a slight pull followed by a release, with a very specific timing, and Robert had seen that exact motion once before, in a television broadcast. Earlier that year, the same hand, the same rhythm. He looked at Paul. Paul had gone completely still behind the kit. Neither of them said a word. Before we hear what happened in that third song, if you found this channel recently and you haven't subscribed yet, we're still building toward 1,000 subscribers, and we're just getting started. A subscribe takes 5 seconds, and it is the only way the next story finds you. Now, the third song. The third song had a long instrumental passage running through the center of it. 90 seconds of open guitar, no vocal, no distraction. Nothing between the man and the instrument and the 60 people in the room. He built it slowly. No rush toward anything, each phrase settling completely before the next one began. Like someone who trusts the middle of the story and doesn't feel the need to get to the ending. And then, near the end of the passage, buried inside the final few bars so briefly it could have been missed, he played 8 notes, gentle, unhurried. The opening line of Purple Haze, his own song. The woman near the front went completely still, both hands flat on the table. She turned fully toward the stage. A man near the back of the room said it, not a whisper. A full voice cracked open in the specific way a voice cracks when certainty and disbelief arrive at exactly the same moment. That's Jimi Hendrix. Jimmy didn't stop playing. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge the name now hanging in the air above 60 stunned people. He finished the phrase the way he had started it, clean, unhurried, and then he let the last note fall quiet. For a moment, the only sound in the speakeasy was 60 people who had forgotten entirely how to move. Then everything broke open at once. Martin Elroy rose from his chair and crossed the room toward the stage with the converted urgency of a man who has just watched his own judgment be dismantled in real time. He reached for Jimmy's hand. Jimmy shook it, briefly, and then stepped to the side and set the Epiphone gently back against the monitor. The band gathered at the edge of the stage. Ellen, Robert, Paul. Nobody was speaking. Paul was making a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. Jimmy sat with them for a while. He didn't talk about himself. He talked about what he had heard in Ellen's voice, about something Robert was doing in the low register that most bass players never trusted themselves to try, about a rhythmic choice Paul had made in the final song that had changed the way the whole structure breathed. He was specific about all of it. He had been listening the entire time. He stayed for almost an hour. Before he left, he said something quietly to Ellen at the far edge of the stage, just to her. She didn't repeat it in a public interview for 15 years. Martin Elroy signed the Ember Roads before the week was out. They released 2 albums. They never became famous. Ellen Cross performed for 27 years to rooms of people who came back every time, And in the last interview she ever gave, she said that was the only measure that had ever meant anything to her. Robert Vale spent 3 decades as a record producer, working in studios with young musicians who reminded him of what it had felt like to be standing at the edge of losing everything on a November night in 1967. He was specific about that too. Not a November. That November. On September 18, 1970, the night Jimi Hendrix died, Robert was finishing a late session in a studio in Soho. Someone came in and told him. He set down his headphones. He sat in the same chair for a long time without moving. He didn't go home. He drove to Margaret Street instead. He parked outside the building where the speakeasy had been and sat in the car in the rain for 40 minutes without going anywhere. He couldn't have explained it to anyone if they'd asked. He just needed to go back to the place where a stranger stood up. In 1982, Ellen gave a long interview to a music journalist writing about the British club scene of the late 60s. Near the end of it, she mentioned that night. She hadn't planned to. It came up naturally, and then she talked about it for 20 minutes without stopping. At the end, the journalist asked what Jimmy had said to her at the edge of the stage before he left. Ellen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He told me the song I had been singing all night was the best thing he had heard in a long time." And then he said, "Don't let anyone tell you this is just a fantasy." She paused. "He said it the way you say something you have had to say to yourself first. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in the power of showing up. And subscribe, because the greatest stories are always the ones nobody planned."